Well, hello. Here we go. It is Now and Next, and we're back in the studio with our cast, our comms and strategy team this week. It is May the 29th, Thursday, as we record this, heading for the final. I guess it's sort of the final weekend of May, but it's one of those shoulder weekends, shall we say, because we're going to get into June in a hurry, and damn well ready for it, because the weather being what it is, it'd be nice to get some weather that you can get outside and enjoy for more than one day in a row. So here's hoping the turn into June is good, but we won't blame that on anybody in terms of, not even the weather guys, just generally speaking, they take a lot of grief. Now, but if June is not good, I'm telling you, we're coming down hard on them. So that'll be the issue. All right, let's get around the table here and just talk to the crew. Lindsay Broadhead is here from Broadhead Communications. Bob Reid joining us, Broadway Strategy, and Anne-Marie Aikins from AMA Communications. And there's been so much to talk about this week. It's funny, before we came on, the big story, the big buzz was all about the royal visit, the king delivering the speech from the throne. That lasted less than 48 hours in terms of buzz, Bob. I mean, there's been that much going on this week to talk about. But just generally, I found that there was an interesting after effect where there was the prescriptive, maybe predictive conversations about the necessity for the monarchy, but that kind of happens every time we bring up the monarchy. I just found that overwhelmingly the response to Charles' presence and his presentation in terms of the throne speech, I was surprised by how excited, maybe is the wrong word, but how engaged people were in that.
I was too. I was really surprised by I shouldn't have been, I suppose, but I was watching the live coverage from the streets of Ottawa, and people were really ebullient in their excitement and their desire to get a handshake or get close enough to have a word with him. And it was refreshing to see. I mean, that always happens when there's a royal visit at any level, I guess. The monarchists come out of the woodwork and make a point of being there. But I think it was broader than that. And my take on this whole thing is we always seem to enjoy a high level royal visit anyway. But the timing of this obviously was strategically important for Mark Carney and company as a power play, as a signal to send south of the border as to Canada's strength, Canada's history, Canada's sovereignty, even though our sovereign lives in another country. But just that whole idea of Canada is different. And in his mic drop moment, as the king said, as the anthem reminds us, the true north is strong and free. All of that, I think, gave us a bit of a hug. We've all felt, I think, under fire for many months now, and being squeezed and being put upon by everything that's been coming out of Washington aimed at us. And now finally, here was something that made us feel good again about this country and about being Canadian and about being different in a different way from the elbows up stuff. I mean, that fired us up too, but this was a nice thing. For a while it was feeling like, why can't we have nice things? Well, this was a nice thing. And so not only strategically, but I think vibe-wise, it went a long way right across the country.
Well, and I complained about the weather off the top, Lindsay. It would have been a completely different vibe if it had been a shitty rainy day in Ottawa for that walkabout and the carriage ride to the Senate. But again, it's sort of interesting, and we've gone over, and everybody's had all analysis of the event itself, 2 ways to Sunday. But it led into, I think, what was interesting, the first session of the new parliament, and it was the first sitting of the new parliament, and it would have been yesterday as we record this, and the prime minister sitting in his first question period. So there were so many firsts along this path. But the one thing I noticed, and we've talked about this before, the tone in the House, the tone in the House of Commons, and particularly that question period. I don't know if you saw any of it, but I thought Carney got up there and acted like the prime minister I think most of us hoped we would always have, no matter what the political stripe was, because he stood his ground in terms of the question, and he was rightly, held to account or questioned significantly about where the country is, where the country's going. But at the same time, he kind of had a self-deprecating smile about it, and maybe even made a joke when the leader of the opposition, before he could actually say anything, he shouted out time. So there was a sense of fun about this. I'm not suggesting it will last, but the tone right away in the House of Commons was different.
Yeah, and this is the bit that I'm actually struck by. And it happened, and I can't put my finger on the moment, but, and I think it happened for Canadians at different times, but it did happen during the election where our appetite, our meaning Canadians, appetite on the whole for the tit for tat battle that was going on between the different party leaders in particular, I think it died. And it, in fact, we became quite off-put by the entire thing. It was not getting us anywhere, right? It was one thing when Trudeau was in government, and we had no goal, frankly, which was troubling in and of itself. Trump crystallized our goal, crystallized what we needed to focus in on, and crystallized this moment of coming together in unity. So Carney, as well as the King, all of these moments, this is exactly the right question, as far as I'm concerned, is the behavior that had been happening in the House beforehand was utterly inappropriate, and it seemed insurmountable. Right? The battling back and forth was just delay tactic after delay tactic. The work of Canada was not getting done because of the immature nature of all the players in that House. The King brought a level of maturity, leadership, diplomacy, all of those things, as you said, that we expect, back to order. And Carney's kind of, quote unquote, nerdy, self-deprecating approach to the entire thing is very British in that sense, right? And that the battle between the different parties in Parliament and in London it's similar to that. So I get the sense that the Tories right now don't know what to do with it. They know how to battle. They know how to throw tomatoes. They know how to spar with words. I haven't yet seen a challenge that's worthy of a debate compared to what the King and Carney have put forward. How long will it last? I don't know. Well, but it has changed the national debate and the tone that we're speaking in.
That is the question. How long will it last? But I think there is a certain appetite and a fatigue maybe that goes hand in glove with this, Anne-Marie, because this might sound like a tangent, but the last episode of The Handmaid's Tale aired this week, all right? And if you watch the series, we watched it right through. The last episode was completely and utterly useless. It did absolutely nothing to advance any of the narrative really in the story. It was a stupid function of trying to create the main character's opportunity to write a book called The Handmaid's Tale. And it was just dumb. And what it said to me is the storyline ran out. The storyline actually got exhausted, that we were fed up with it. And even the writers were fed up with it. If you will recall back in 2017, when that series launched, it was the first year into Trump. And everybody looked at it and said, Margaret Atwood has written this prophecy about what's going to happen in the United States. And we all glommed onto it because we thought that this was real. And we were, we had our own version kind of elbows up in that case as well. But we got fatigued by what has happened vis-a-vis Trump. We got fatigued by what's gone on with the tariffs. And so the parallel for me was this storyline for The Handmaid's Tale, where, okay, we're so done with that. I'm tired of it. I can't take it anymore. And I think Lindsay's right. All right, enough already. We've moved on from this tit for tat. But here's the thing. for me, the pivot has been now we've moved on from the tit for tat. Now we're looking at, okay, how are we going to get shit done in this country? The premiers and the prime minister meeting next week. They're going to have their sit down, and he's already sent, whatever documentation along to say, here's the agenda. Here's how we're going to move major infrastructure projects along. He's given the chiefs of the James Bay 10 days to consult and offer their thinking on how we're going to do things around the Ring of Fire and mining and all that sort of thing. So whether you like that or not, the speed of it is what we're doing now is we're really focused on sharpening what it is going to mean for the reset for this country. So I hope that that's where we go with this. But to me, that was the pivot.
Yeah. I have a parallel. It reminded me because I grew up in a really huge family with 11 brothers and sisters. And I'll get to the point, I promise, quickly. We were jammed together. They had those kids like one after another. And there were 6 boys in a row. And it was like chaos most of the time. Sometimes we'd get into this rut, and no matter what my parents did, they'd be fighting, snipping, and it would last day over day. And then something bad would happen. And the gloves were off. And when I mean gloves were off, we just dropped our grievances against each other. And we came together as a family. We worked together as a family. We just set everything aside. And I think Canadians, what I've seen happen is this patriotism. And that's what I think the King really tapped into with his very spirited address. And there was the, getting back to the anthem at the end. And, it was really super touching. You couldn't help but be really touched by it all and moved and energized for it. But getting back to what Carney, and I think what his right now, his approval ratings are very high. But I think the only thing higher than his approval ratings are Canadians' expectations of him. And so I think this will last as long as our expectations are getting met. And I think, and that is to get things done. As you said, get shit done, because we're really tired of, we've been fighting for, it seems like for the last few years, not getting anything done, not focused, and things are just getting worse and worse. And Trump is just, messing it even further. So I think we really have to, keep, I'm sure Carney and his whole team and is focused on making sure that there is a steady drip of progress, and that Canadians' expectations of him are being met, to see that he is really following through with the promises he made during the election, and not disappointing people, which is not an easy task when there's so many problems that we have to address.
But Carney has set those expectations himself, which I find really interesting, right? A lot of times new governments will try and temper expectations. Like, we're going to move forward purposefully, but, don't expect overnight miracles to happen. This rhetoric is completely different. And it began in the campaign, it carried through in the throne speech. We're going to hear it continuing to go forward. This talk of the biggest transformation in the Canadian economy since World War II. The talk of the traditional relationship with the United States is over. And we're going to move forward. We're going to move quickly, right? We're going to build. So that expectation has been set from the center by Carney and his team, that we are going to come out of the gates moving fast and we're going to get things done. And Emery, you're entirely right. There better be signs of things getting done, or there will be hell to pay. It's an interesting strategy that he's moving forward on.
Well, Lindsay, I'm already hearing about this, balls to the wall, let's get her done approach. And there's some comparison between what Prime Minister Carney's doing and Premier Ford is doing in Ontario, the differences, the similarities, and so on. But and we all know what Bill 5 is doing in Ontario. It's been a disaster for the provincial government. But additionally, we're talking about the team around the Prime Minister now, and I'm already hearing, holy shit, this guy's serious, and it might already be a tough room to work in.
Good. I don't know what to say. Like, good. This is the most important room to be in. I know how I'd behave, and I'd know if, when you say yes to a job like that, you're saying yes to that job first. So good. Like, these are immensely serious times. It's funny, the King's speech, I didn't watch. I listened to on the radio because I was driving. And I had kids in the car and family in the car, and everyone listened. And the performative nature of his words were very strong. Half of it was in French, right? Direct signal to Quebec. There were multiple thank yous and acknowledgements to the Indigenous community. The king of the colonizing country saying thank you and being humble to Canada's Indigenous people. Wow. The bringing together of, France, England, Canada in the language, the coast to coast nature of talking about the environment for which he's a leader, so I only go back to the speech to signal where I do think he means business, Carney, that is. I think this has been really well orchestrated. There have been hiccups along the way. There have been some MPs who have done really silly things. But the fact is this is business time. And I know, and I'm sure you guys know too, like, businesses are quite intrigued, right? If you're in the energy sector right now, the transportation sector right now, if you're in anything that has been wanting to build something, do something, get something done, connect to something, this is a critical moment, right? We face employment issues, talent issues, we face low productivity, all the things that our economy has failed to do. Carney could be the trigger to turn it around, and it's an immense task. But I think we're all going to somehow play in it, and it's bloody exciting. But man, is that bar so freaking high, right? Like, my sense is that and I'd be curious to know what you guys think, but if he chooses one or two really cool, impactful projects that get the ball rolling and they're feasible, that might be enough, right? He doesn't have to conquer the world. He has to get a few great projects going.
And hopefully not the tunnel under the 401,
I defer.
Well, what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago on the ledge, and just that very thing, Lindsay. And we're working on this project of the Arctic, and specifically around the mining operations in Nunavut. And in the course of our work during the production, Manitoba and Nunavut, Anne-Marie had an MOU signed, and it was the premier of Nunavut at Keokuk and Wabkanu in Manitoba. And they sat down and they said, we are going to agree that we're going to run a hydro and fiber link line into Nunavut. And the cool part about it is that it's going to actually run to Agnico Eagle's doorstep, because they will be the primary user of that power. But all they need now, and I say all they need as if it's nothing, is federal approval, federal buy-in on this. There's already a quote unquote a shovel in the ground project.
Stamp.
Right? And so it does a whole bunch of things. There's transformative infrastructure. It's driven by the private sector's ability to do business in a remote part of the country. It involves and is led by the Inuit. And it just so happens that the premier of the province of Manitoba is Indigenous. So it's not just about ticking boxes. That symbolically would be a huge thing to do. So I'm putting my money on that one.
Yeah, Canadians elected Mr. Carney, I think, because he set the expectations so high. You're exactly right, Bob. He set those, and that's, I think, why people elected him. And to meet those expectations, he's going to have to look for projects that are immense in their impact and their national impact, how quickly they can get done. And I think he really means business. My colleague at Curious Public, Lloyd Brang-Eastman, he was a part of the speechwriting team for Carney's campaign. And he tells a really unique story about how he, the prime minister during the campaign, was absolutely hands-on on his speech writing, on the messages and how it was delivered. Every word was scripted for him, but he had a lot of impact on the final product. And that's interesting for leaders. Not all leaders are like that. They're all very unique in how you write a speech for them and how they deliver it and so forth. But he was very hands-on, and I think that's the kind of prime minister he's going to be. And I think we saw him in his first question period was exactly what you said, Dave. He was very different, and I think people appreciated that. And I think if that continues, and I really hope it does, because I really think that's going to sustain his popularity if we sustain this kind of pressure and this kind of how we behave with one another and get shit done. And I'm really kind of looking forward to it. It'd be really an exciting time, as Lindsay says. We might really get stuff done.
Well, Bob, the interesting part for me, and I just, again, I wonder this whole idea that it's new, and the prime minister was direct and purposeful in talking about the new government, because Andrew Scheer, the interim leader for the Tories, is saying, well, it's the same old Liberal, this, that, and the other thing in question period. And the prime minister responded, well, this is a new mandate, this is a new government, and so on. But, to draw the distinction between Carney and Trudeau even further, I just wonder who in Carney's office said to Trudeau, when you go to the throne speech, wear running shoes, just so we'll have something to bitch about.
You think that came from Carney's office?
Oh, for sure. It was all strategic.
Yeah, that just was such a head scratcher for me. I mean, was he trying to make a statement? Was he just trying to steal the spotlight? Hey, everybody, look at me. Was it was it his version of the pirouette that his father did behind the previous monarch so many years ago? I think that's giving way too much credit. I think it was just Justin Trudeau dressing up to put on a show, because that's been his default position so many times, or default response to big events so long through his history. I would love to know what the inside thinking was on that, if any.
Yeah, well, at least it distracted from his socks, I guess, Lindsay, which was usually the source of the conversation. But again, even that posture, the prime minister Carney's posture in the question period, and I'm thinking now, how would Trudeau have handled that? It would have been a knife to the eye, smarmy kind of tone, backhanded, whatever, about what great work they've done with the Liberal record. I think Carney managed to probably didn't use all the time he had, for sure, to answer the question, but was very succinct and skillful in for a guy who's never been in Parliament. I thought looked pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's run big organizations and businesses, right? I don't think we can discount that kind of experience. And that's not to take away from politicians, because that in and of itself is an art. And it's I can only imagine the nerves and all of the feels that one brings in there, and try to maintain an air of cool while you're delivering a message would be very difficult. I don't know. I think all the comparisons with Trudeau now I'm kind of over with. I see this as frankly a very different government. It's the same color, and there are some of the same players, but as we know, when you get a new boss, or you are the new boss, the team may stay the same, but the game is different. And that's, I think, where we're at, right? If this team has a different mandate, different direction, different energy, and certainly an entire different backdrop globally, I'm not comparing apples to apples anymore. And as far as Mr. Trudeau's shoes go, I really hate talking about politicians' clothes for many reasons. But it's hard not to agree with Bob and Emery that it was performative.
Well, and that's what you missed by listening to it on the radio. I'm just saying.
That's right.
Wasn't one of those things. A change in leadership with the same team, pretty much as we speak. I guess within the last hour, the Toronto Star, writing the story that the TTC has a new CEO. Mandeep Lally is the new CEO at the commission. A year or so after. How long has it been since Rick Leary left? I mean, is it a year?
Yeah.
Got to be. So here's the question, and you come from the transit world, Anne-Marie. Is this enough to sort of do a reset at the TTC, because it's in desperate need? The only reason the TTC isn't the number one transit system that we hate is because we have Metrolinx.
Yes, it'll be interesting. I don't know him, and I don't know a lot of transit people that know him. So that's interesting. Usually, when you're in the transit world, and I was still a newbie in comparison to many others that have been in there for decades. But I have chatted with a couple of people that this is their world, and they didn't know him. So that's interesting. It's interesting. It's the first person of color. That's a good thing. I did note, quickly looking at his resume, that his background seems to be mostly in subways. So underground movement, that seems to be a lot of what he knows. The other thing he has is elevator experience. So it's those crosswords that we have sometimes the biggest challenges with our streetcar system and our bus system. So I'll be curious to see how he handles that. I'm curious as to how Greg Percy, the interim CEO that's been there for the last year, filling in for Rick after Rick left a year ago, who is a person I do know very well because he came from the Metrolinx world and the Go Transit world. I wonder how he feels, because he had signaled in his intention that he would like the job. But he's got this new guy's going to have his hands full because there are a lot of challenges that they have to deal with, and that's going to be his first task. Keeping customers happy is the biggest challenge.
Bob, this throws back because he's got experience in the New York system and the London system, and that reminds us of Andy Byford, who went London, Toronto, New York. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter. Everybody will remember on the day that there was a problem on the subway. Andy Byford was out there with his vest on, and he was directing people onto buses, doing somebody else's job, but being visible, being on the scene, being present in terms of the customer. So the customer might not have actually had the ride they expected that morning, but at least there was some soothe because, the CEO's out here doing his bit to try and make sure everything's running on time. So, and again, performative, maybe, but reputationally, I would think, and you guys would know better, that's probably something the TTC needs right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, the TTC is in the customer service business for, help me out, Emery, 2 million customers a day, right?
Yeah. That's exactly what they are.
Yeah. So it's imperative that when things go sideways, that people at least get a signal that those at the top care, that their commute got screwed up, that they missed whatever event they were going to because the system shut down or was delayed or God knows what. I think it's a similar frustration that so many of us feel as airline passengers when things go sideways, that there is no voice, there is no face, there is no person. They seem exceptionally poor at communications when there are unexpected situations arise. So I fully agree with you about Andy Byford, his legacy, and he will be thought of as a very, very hands-on CEO. He was a very staunch advocate for the TTC as well with other senior levels of government and got some wins, but was never able to get enough to really transform the system. And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for this new gentleman is how well can he work with the senior levels where the funding really comes from that enables the head of the Transit Commission to actually get things done. So remains to be seen.
Well, Lindsay, I also remember when Andy Byford was on the scene, whenever he was out in public, he wore his name tag badge on his jacket, right? He didn't assume that everybody knew who he was or that he was somehow a TTC employee.
All staff have to.
Right. But he would make the point, and I'm not sure other CEOs at the TTC had always done that. But the point being, I'm part of this team. And it was a subtle but important way to, express that to somebody whom he may have met on the street, helping them get onto a bus. He didn't have to say, I'm the CEO, but I am Andy Byford, who works at the TTC. So there was some ownership there in a very small, subtle way. But as we move forward with TTC now, the last guy to come into a transit executive job that is of some significance, Phil Verster. When Phil Verster got the job at Metrolinx, it was thought Phil was going to knock it out of the park here. Well, we don't even know what park Phil is in, and I say that with all due respect right now. And rudderless is what Metrolinx is. So, we're back to that whole thing around leadership and expectations. You can have them going into the job, but boy, you better be able to deliver, because where are we going to be 2 or 3 years from now?
Exactly.
That's right. Yeah, leadership matters. We've said it, I think, every episode now for the last few months. Leadership matters now probably more than ever. You have a workforce who's still really disconnected after COVID. It's weird saying the C word, but the implications are far-reaching. Mm-hmm. And when you have a workforce like the TTC that has often been frontline to a lot of our cities, difficult populations, disgruntled travelers, a lot of tech issues, infrastructure issues. What do you do as a leader when you can't solve it all at the same time? So I think, there's a pie graph almost here. A number of things are going to have to work at the same time. He's going to have to get some support, some financials. There are problems that leadership alone aren't going to solve at the TTC. You need a budget that works and is working for you. But there is a huge margin of space where I imagine his teams can be motivated, performance can increase, small service-orientated things across the system can improve. And then there's all the things I know I don't know, right? Anne-Marie talked about the connectivity to the bus systems, the streetcar systems. I'm still in the dark about our transit congestion guru and what happens there, where the mix is there. But he's going to need support. But this guy better darn well be a guy who has sleeves to be rolled up and speaks motivating words and is out on the street. He's now the mayor of a small town of TTC, and his people are going to want to see him.
Yeah, and I guess and all of that is great, but to Anne-Marie's point about who is this guy? So it's going to take us a while to get to know who he is. He'll have to be introduced to us. The interesting connection, I think, Bob, to make will be to go back and say, what was it that the search committee found was the difference to hire him to take on this job a year after the last CEO left? There's going to have to be something really remarkable about what it found in their criteria that they think he's going to be able to push this one over the hill.
Or maybe not. Maybe he was the best they could do, the best they could find. It could be that case as well, right? It could either be this guy has got what we need and we went out and got him, or we put the call out, we did a big wide search, and out of anybody who put their hand up, this guy seemed like he could do the job. That could be the reality too, right? That's true. I don't expect anybody to say that publicly if that's the case, but that could have been the way it went down.
Yeah, well, and we've said this before, Lindsay. There were key jobs at the city, TTC, Metrolinx, and there's nobody knocking down the doors or in a hurry to get some of those jobs. Recently, they've just hired a new chief planner at the city, but there were some significant jobs like that, and it may well get to, okay, why would I take this job when I can go elsewhere and do that and avoid all the bullshit and grief that I'm going to get from the bureaucracy at City Hall or Queen's Park?
Sure. I mean, I do think there are huge groups of professionals, though, who would jump at a chance to take a job where you're putting yourself in such a difficult ring. They're thankless jobs in many cases. The difference is what I've observed is people who are stepping out of those jobs or aren't stepping in because they don't have the support systems around them, right? If you're going to be the enemy of everyone, and there's going to be a downloading of blame all the time, why would you take that job, right? If there's going to be a system where you are seen as the fighter, or you're seen as the fixer, or you're seen, frankly, as the person just to mobilize your team, different organizations need different things. You need the support of those who you report to, because then the conversation's different, and you're not going to get crapped on in the media or whatever the case may be. So part of it is cultural, frankly, and they go from thankless jobs to jobs that really make a difference, and maybe the salary isn't that private sector salary, but this is a solid, incredible public sector leadership role that's worth hanging my hat on. And I know I get to work with that guy or that girl, or I have, that team. So that, in my experience, on the whole, has been why people take jobs, or equally why people are like, this is too risky for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, from the 100,000 foot view in terms of leadership down right to track level, Anne-Marie, you were anxious to talk about this, and the story popped up this week again about making the GO station at south of Etobicoke. What's the station specifically? Was it Mimico? Mimico, right. So to make it accessible, and that sounds like a great idea. Why don't we do it? Well, we've been talking about this, if I'm reading the story right, in some cases for almost like 25 years or 15 years.
No, it was legislated in 2005.
Oh,
by 2025, which seemed like a long way out, all transit stations in Ontario had to be fully accessible. Well, and most of them are the underground stations. The above ground stations, that's no problem. They're accessible. They're easy to make accessible. But so that's Toronto and our old stations. And some of them are tremendously old. When you think of Queen Street, when you think of Eglinton Station, that they're very, very old stations. And Mimico is about 60 years old, coming on 60 years old, and they're not accessible stations. So TTC still has a dozen stations that aren't accessible and won't be accessible in the immediate future for a couple of reasons. One is mostly it's money. And one of the things that governments of all levels try to do is they try to absorb the cost during other construction. So, for example, if they try to do redevelopment of an apartment building near a condo building with the transit stations, they have the developer do the accessibility part of it. Well, Mimico's tried that a couple of times and the deals fell through. So that didn't happen. And so it didn't get done. And so now they put out a tender for a planner to plan a station. It is exceptionally difficult when a station is underground to make it accessible if it wasn't originally built as a. So I get that. And this new fella at TTC is going to have that immense challenge as well, to how to get these stations accessible. And I think one of the reasons he was hired was because of his experience with subways and all of the things that have to happen with connecting our subway system to the Metrolink's new projects that are being built, like Finch and Crosstown and all of the Ontario line. Those connections are challenging to do, and he's going to need that experience. He's also one of the the things that many transit riders are annoyed with every single solitary day, many times throughout the day, are the slow orders on our subway system. They likely saw him as maybe an option for fixing all of those slow orders on subways and getting rid of them. But I do have one piece of advice for the new CEO is this mayor, our new mayor in Toronto, I'm still calling her new because Olivia Chow is still, I think, getting her legs about her, has a tendency, and we've talked about this several times before, is to blaming her staff for problems that go wrong. She often blames the frontline staff, but she also blames her leadership. So if I were him, I would be an Andy Byford type, and I would be out there when a problem happens, get ahead of it, own the narrative for what happened, what went wrong, and how they're fixing it. So he owns the narrative and he's out there doing his job. It will cut the legs a little bit off of if there's a tendency to then blame him for whatever went wrong, or his staff for if something goes wrong. There's nothing that demoralizes staff more than when the highest person in their city blames them for their attitude or for failing to produce or whatever they are being blamed for. So that's my one piece of advice for him is be that leader. That's why we elected Prime Minister Carney, I think, because he showed us he had that leadership and that he could take control and he could get things done. I think the same and perhaps with just as much expectation is on this new TTC CEO, excuse me. That's I think he's got a lot of things to do, and that and fixing all of the stations, whether it's Mimico, whether it's all the TTC stations, has got to be top priority for him.
Well,
Anne-Marie, you should have a leather couch in the back for all transit-related leaders. They just come in, have a tea, talk about their worries.
A lava lamp. Yeah, that'd be good.
I can't speak to the drugs on offer, but Anne-Marie Aikins.
The whole, though, he's come back to a lot of expectation. But, Bob, it's early wins. Right. It's about the only way that you're going to get any sense that you're fulfilling expectation is to deal with early wins. So whether it's the Prime Minister putting his stamp of approval on the hydrofiber line running from Manitoba to Nunavut, or the new TTC chair saying, here's our 6-month plan to make sure that these 3 stations are going to be accessible by this date. That all kind of fits into that agenda of getting shit done. Yeah.
And you've got to be careful in the goals that you pick. So
sure.
You've got to put your political capital behind things that can be delivered, that are tangible, that people will see results from, rather than it just being pie in the sky or so long term that by the time it actually happens, it's been forgotten about as to who was the instigator and who was the driver of it in the first place. Stating some of the obvious there, I realize, but it's true. If you want to get wins on the board, you got to do that in fairly short order. So you've got to prioritize things that will deliver visibly and in a reasonable timeline. And when it comes to some of the big scale things that Carney's talking about, or making big changes in an aging and overloaded transit system, that's hard to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just as we move into June, and we noted, this is going to be our outdoor period. This is the outdoor season for we Canadians, and
I hope so.
Right. So we kind of want to get out there and do that stuff. And you've alluded to sort of the after effects still of COVID, and I think we still feel that in terms of how we work, how we live, how we socialize, Lindsay, still. And I think this is just the new way of the world. But it's nice to see that so much of that activity that happens outdoors is driven by cultural festivals and the arts. And I know, Michael Hollett's all excited about this year's edition of North by Northeast, and it's some significant anniversary. And I'm stupid now; I didn't remember to write it down. But the effect that has had, not just on the economy, but the cultural, the music, the tech, side of things that goes on in this city. And we love all of that stuff. But now we see this week where, we're talking about millions of dollars being invested in new security for these outdoor events, particularly to make sure that anything that's happening on the streets is, keeping people safe from whoever is deciding that they're going to use their vehicle as a weapon. And that might sound outlandish, but boy, in the last year, if you started to track some of these events, whether it's here in Canada or around the world, that has become the weapon of choice for whoever wants to make a statement about whatever community. And there are so many people who are vulnerable at these events. I know it sounds awful, but I don't see that we can get around it. I think we got to do this, have this kind of investment.
The answer is I don't know, right? Like I worry when we are fearful and plan for things so that there's a zero-sum risk, right? We can't account for every eventuality. But the arts, the entertainment, this is why we live. Like that, it's the most human of things to come together and celebrate in all of the cultural elements that we have. I'm of two minds because the most recent one out west was, this was a case of mental health, and I'm not actually certain that the goal of the exercise was to cause harm. I don't know. Toronto's incident many years ago certainly was, but that wasn't an event. That was a moment, and as devastating as had it been an event, but it was just an open street. So I don't know the answer to your question. I don't think we should be spending every last dollar protecting, because if people want to cause harm, they will, and a boundary won't solve it. If people want to cause harm, they'll do it another way. Semicolon. If I may, we still have to be smart, right? And we can't leave, I'm going to say especially for kids, we can't leave spaces that have particular vulnerabilities open, but we can't think of or solve for every problem.
Well, and I agree with that. But I think, Anne-Marie, if you've been in cities in Europe where this is not even a matter of safety, it's about making it an issue of a pedestrian square, for example, in some towns in Europe, and there are vehicles that make their way around because it might be a tour or something that goes, but there are bollards that kind of come up and go down, and it's signaled by the vehicle that's coming on because it's got the technology to do that. So there are ways of doing this without restricting the event, but it's almost like saying, okay, well, we've got seatbelts, we might as well use them.
Yeah, I think this is one of the solutions is I want to give examples. Union Station, after the van attack, within 3 days, because I was working in the building at the time, suddenly the city dropped big, huge, ugly concrete things, barriers all around the peripheral of Union Station to protect it. And they kept saying it was temporary, and they were only putting these there until all of the construction at Union Station was done. And they were ugly. They tried beautifying them they had painting contests and stuff. They were ugly as sin. They weren't even things you could sit on. And the Union Station redevelopment, I think, has been gorgeous. And the boulevard there is gorgeous, except they didn't put any furniture. So they didn't want people sitting. They didn't want people staying and lingering. And that's it's about homeless people. It's about safety. It's about a variety of things. And these big concrete barriers, I will tell you, a week after the van attack, we did have a car go down that street. A crazy guy, drunk out of his mind, tried to drive through onto the sidewalk to get around the vehicles there, and he couldn't. He got bounced off of these concrete barriers. So those barriers did save lives. They did. But they're still ugly as sin. And all these years later, they finally just recently, very recently, replaced them. And guess what they replace them with? Other big concrete barriers. They're just big blocks that are all around the city. And I'm like, these are exactly like the other ones. These are just cleaner right now. And maybe you might be able to sit on them, but they're ugly. A different way to do it is to design your parks, your wide open streets with to protect the pedestrians and avoid that is through jersey barriers. It's through building concrete planters that are the big concrete planters that are heavy, that still operate, prevent the vehicles from coming onto the sidewalk or the boulevard, but they look beautiful and they have another function. You build kind of functional barriers that are beautiful and then just end up beautifying there, and that's you design that from the outset. So it has to be part of your planning. It's not something that go, oh, we're having a festival, let's try and make this street safer, and we'll spend all this money now. Build it into, when you're building these things, build it into your budgets to make it beautiful and safe. It's possible to do it. They do it all over the world.
Well, Bob, there's the challenge for Toronto, though. Every small community, I mean, we boast about Toronto's, this community of neighborhoods, and we have so many cultural events that happen on a micro level all across, and that's what gives the city such great character and quality of life. If they even, I've heard somebody say, well, we'll have this area for these street festivals. Well, the folks in the East End aren't going to want to come to the middle of the city or the West End or whatever. You want to have your local community festival in your local community. So you got to solve for the lowest common denominator in some cases. That's what makes this challenging.
Absolutely. I take everything Anne-Marie said, and I applaud it, actually, about building the function into the form from the outset. For places like Union Station is a great example where you do need that on a permanent basis. You do need that on a continuous basis. But for the festival at Witchford Barns or the Taste of Little Portugal or whatever it is that happens in those neighborhoods once a year for a weekend kind of thing, okay, that doesn't make sense. So that's when you do drop in the concrete blocks for a couple of days, or you get some TTC buses, as I've seen done before, and park them along the perimeter, or garbage trucks. Are they pretty? Not in the least. But do they do the job? Do they do them quickly? Are they easy to move in and move out at relatively low cost? Yes. So there does need to be a balance between the two. And given the unfortunate world we live in and the horrific events that have transpired quite recently, we've got to do everything that we can reasonably do. Because, of course, God forbid, if something bad happens here, the first question is going to be, well, what were the preventative measures in place? What steps had been taken to try and stop this from happening in the first place? Mm-hmm. And Lindsay, you're right. You can't stop them all. You can't stop everything. You can't wall everything off, and you don't want to either. So that's the balance that needs to be struck. But I think we can take reasonable steps, and so some greater investment in security, I think, is warranted.
You can't wall everything off. Before we go, they're going to take the walls down around John A. Macdonald at Queen's Park. The statue is going to be out for all to see. Lindsay, how long do you think it's going to be before we're going to, somebody's going to deface it? I know there's some new treatment on the statue that's going to make it hard to spray paint, or it's going to be easier to get off. But that's going to happen. And then the whole argument about, John A.'s position and history in this country is going to come to the fore again. We talked a couple of weeks ago about, Dundas and all of the name changes that are going on in the city, and how important it is to make sure that we recognize and have our conversation. And I would say that this Canada Day, if John A.'s statue is, on full display at Queen's Park, it's probably a good day for it, because then we can have a Canada Day conversation about real truth and reconciliation.
Well, this is it. And admittedly, I have and publicly, because of the radio we all do, I have flip-flopped on this issue in a very vocal way, right? Because, there'll be 3 years ago, I felt one way, and then I was adamant I felt a different way, 2 years ago. Because this has been an issue that's been, I think, fairly prolific over a long time. And I'm not embarrassed to say that I think about it very deeply and I find it difficult. Where I am right now, though, and I'm giving myself a little bit of, I guess, wiggle room to change yet again. But having still thought about it quite a bit, I look to, Holocaust memorials. I look to the Berlin Wall. I look to how we teach kids. And rightly or wrongly, these men of our past are the men of our past. And they got us here, and along the way made major errors. But we're here. And I would rather have a learned discussion, not an erasure. So I would rather that memorials such as John A. or whomever, whatever, have signage, have opportunities to learn, opportunities to talk. We are, to take this just a higher level for a moment, we're having this virus amongst us right now where debate is just this toxic thing and we're unable to listen. I'd rather not erase, but acknowledge, and acknowledge that some of history is troubled and it ain't black and white, and that is okay. So I'm thankful that the barriers are coming down in this particular case. I'm thankful that they have this magic glaze on top of it or whatever it is, so that bylaw officers aren't going to be wasting their hours and hours on it. But I also acknowledge that it's not that I'm supportive of it all the time. It's that it's our history, and that's okay.
I dare say you never would have reached this conclusion in your conclusion if we weren't on a place where we could have a mature debate or discussion that was, sort of a safe place conversation to have. Because you don't get there if you don't allow for that sort of level of discussion. And I've used the analogy earlier, Anne-Marie, it's almost as if we humans create our own algorithm. We don't want to hear what Lindsay has to say, so she's not part of my tribe anymore. I'm not going to talk to her, and never mind listen to her. That's what this is about. I mean, I can see if you want to improve the display, there should be QR codes there that should be able to say, boom, this is what happened. The Salma Makwa should be able to pop up on your screen and say, this is why I object to John A. at the legislature. And Saul is a very well-respected member of the provincial parliament, First Nation Indigenous member. His voice is important in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think whenever subjects like this are deeply felt, so they're emotional, I think one of the things that we fail to often do with our young people and with people in general is teach emotional intelligence, but allows you to have very different points of view, but to discuss them without hating each other and without denigrating each other and just trying to shut down conversation. It can be very, very difficult for a lot of people. And but that's what we need to do when we talk about our history, because I don't think it serves anybody just to wipe out our history and try to pretend things didn't happen because they were bad things. That's the only way we learn, is to examine them fully and have thoughtful conversations about it. So I hear what you say, Lindsay. I've felt differently. And when you start to feel differently is the more you look into it and the more you learn about it, then you start to,
well, that's right. Because you've got to I almost want us to do a whole hour just on this subject and use different cases. But there is an immense pressure to have a point of view. And I don't know if this carries on in our school systems in the high schools and universities or not, but, I was taught more to question. And as I've become later in my career, you build up the muscles of what you know, and you have confidence that you know, and equally what you don't know, and you're cool saying I don't know certain things. But as it relates to more social related issues like this, there's this immense pressure to have a black or white point of view. And I've always been a fan of the gray, because it allows time for listening to points of view. It allows time to you investigate your own bias, but also your own beliefs and values, and that matters. And that stuff doesn't happen in an instant. And it certainly doesn't happen as you're growing, or becoming familiar with if you're older and becoming familiar with a really difficult subject. So, here, the more opportunities that we can to listen to one another, question one another, and also, have our own points of view questioned. That's it. That's all it's about.
Dave, so, please don't throw to me. Please don't make me speak. I don't want to have to follow that. I don't want to have to follow either one of these ladies who just absolutely nailed this discussion. So.
But maybe there's hope for your alma maters.
Yeah, one down, and one on its way down. The university formerly known as Ryerson, and then Sir John A. Macdonald Collegiate Institute.
Yeah. I'm
0 for 2.
Well, I keep coming back to how important perhaps this Canada Day is going to be in our history. And so there will be things that should be said and must be said and will be done, and we'll come to it with a different lens because of the conversations we've had, particularly, I think, over the last 3 months. And I'm going to be curious to see, if in fact this comes down, the cladding comes down from around the statue, what conversation that sparks Canada Day and how it qualifies it differently in this new reset environment that we're in. So, okay, well, let's leave it at that. Look at that. That was a quick hour, but I'm glad we sat down and had the chance to walk through all of that. Bob Reid, Lindsay Broadhead, Anne-Marie Aikins, thank you. They are the cast, our comms and strategy team here at Now and Next. And of course, they appear on the YouTube, because it's the YouTube channel that carries the show, as well as all of the apps that you listen to your podcasts on: Spotify, Apple, and iHeart, etc. If you are listening and haven't subscribed to the show yet, do that right now in the app. If you are watching on YouTube and haven't subscribed to the channel, do it right now, because this then will end up as a notification, and oh yeah, there's the show. And so it's not just kind of something that you'll catch by accident. We'll be in your inbox, and you'll be able to listen to, watch the shows as they are produced. And so let's leave it at that. We're coming up to the first hint of a weekend in June. We hope you get out there to enjoy it. And we'll be back in your inbox next week. It's Now and Next for Story Studio Network. I'm Dave Trafford.